Tick-tock, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. I'm your friendly neighborhood philosopher, David Wood, and with me now is, once again, the most useless person in the entire history of humanity, because he reports on Jihad, a thing that doesn't exist unless you're just talking about going to the gym and having that kind of internal struggle. But who cares about reporting on that, Robert? So why do you even exist?
You're right, David. There is absolutely no reason for my existence on this planet. And that is because everybody knows that jihad is an interior spiritual struggle to better oneself. And to chronicle that for nearly 20 years is something that only an insane person would do, and here I am.
Thank you for admitting your...
A total waste of oxygen.
The truth about Robert Spencer.
That reminds me, this is a total non sequitur, but years ago, you remember the Imam Mustafa Zayed? I haven't heard anything about him in years, but I debated him twice, about 10 or 12 years ago. And I had written a biography of Muhammad called The Truth About Muhammad. And Zayed put out a book, self-published as far as I recall, that looked exactly in its design like The Truth About Muhammad, and he called it The Lies About Muhammad.
Nice.
And I thought, this is a very self-aware individual.
Yeah.
This is the perfect title for his book.
So just to clarify, you're saying you put out The Truth About Muhammad, and he put out The Lies About Muhammad.
That's right. And so even in all this 20 years of uselessness and futility, there have been a few laughs. And I have to thank Mustafa Zayed, wherever you are, for that at very least. In any case, there is a busy week in jihad. Unfortunately, as you know, in Pakistan, we have Zafar Bhatti, a 58-year-old man. He has been charged with blasphemy since 2012. He was sentenced to life in prison in 2017, and just the last few days he was sentenced to death. I do not know why his sentence keeps on being adjusted, but the worst part about this case is that he denies all the accusations against him, and he contends that somebody took his mobile phone when he was not aware, used it to send a text against Muhammad. Now, this is entirely plausible, and there have been other cases documented of people who cannot read or write being charged with blasphemy because blasphemous texts show up on their phones. This is something that people who want to target the victims for whatever reason do, because a blasphemy charge in Pakistan, it's essentially a death sentence, whatever it is, and even if you're acquitted, because if the courts don't execute, if the government doesn't execute you, then you're likely to be killed by a mob.
And for everyone, on a more serious note here, for everyone who doesn't understand why we do what we do, and why, especially the ex-Muslim community, the apostate prophet, and the men and women who are ex-Muslims and who are exposing the dawah on YouTube and Twitter and so on, people being sentenced to death for blasphemy is still a real thing in parts of the world. And here you have a situation where a text goes out or something like that, and first life in prison, but then for some reason someone decides to modify the sentence to death, and that happens things like that happen over and over again. Lots of times it's just, well, people that he was in an argument with said he committed blasphemy. The Muslims this Christian was in an argument with said he blasphemed Muhammad, and that'll suddenly be enough for a prison sentence or a death sentence. And
even sometimes people who want to seize his property or gain some kind of legal advantage over him. And this happens all too often in Pakistan, that the blasphemy laws are used as a tool for personal vendettas, to settle personal scores, or even to commit great injustices against completely innocent people. And it's an all-purpose tool because there is no getting out of it. Once you've got a blasphemy charge, you're guilty. The best example of that is Aisha Bibi, who was on death row in Pakistan for, I believe it was 9 years, 8 years or 9 years. And finally, the Pakistani Supreme Court took up her case and she was acquitted. But then there were calls all over the country for her to be killed anyway. And there were actually some jihadis who were going house to house to find her, to kill her. She managed to escape, get out of the country. But it's certain, if she were to go back to Pakistan now and it were known that she was there, she would be murdered.
And all because someone said that she said something. And that's enough for people to never let it go. So on the one hand, Christians in Pakistan don't have a lot of opportunities to challenge the blasphemy laws. They're just on the receiving end of these blasphemy punishments. So if things are ever going to change, it's got to come from outside pressure and outside criticism. So we kind of have to be relentless in criticizing what goes on there. And also, we have to make sure that that stuff never spreads. Because, Robert, I don't know about you, but I hear from our jihadi friends all the time that Islam is the world's fastest growing religion and eventually it's going to take over Western nations and so on. And so what they're basically saying is, if you do not want to live under the same rules that we have in Pakistan, you'd better make sure you do something about it. And so, well, we are. And we're doing it entirely peacefully. And yet this makes us the most hateful people in the world.
Yes, it does, David. And so in any case, there is a great deal of jihad activity already in the West because, of course, of, as you noted, the fastest growing religion in the world being spread in the West because of converts to Islam, because of mass migration into the West and so on. And it's an interesting thing to note that these converts, I have actually a category at Jihad Watch called Converts to Islam that you can search for in the category section. And you'll see story after story after story going back 20 years of converts to Islam getting involved in jihad activity. And the latest one is a gentleman named Nathan Saunders, who is known as the Ginger Jihadi because he is red-headed and he is in the UK. He was convicted of downloading terror documents, and he screamed Allahu Akbar and made Islamic State salutes. That is, of course, the one upraised index finger. Many Muslims insist this is not just the Islamic State salute. Anybody can make this sign, but it must be noted that this was never a very well-known or famous sign of allegiance to Islam or to Allah until the Islamic State popularized it. So this fellow screamed Allahu Akbar, he made the Islamic State salute or the confession of Tawheed, the oneness of Allah, and he threatened teenagers with a knife and explained, we cut people's heads off. Now that, of course, comes straight from the Quran, chapter 47, verse 4. When you meet the unbelievers, strike the necks. It was kind of him to explain that he was going to first. But you got to wonder, this is a convert to Islam. Now you would imagine a convert to Islam would go to a mosque, talk to the imam, take whatever instruction is given, and that he would learn the true, peaceful Islam that is taught in all the mosques in the West. So how is it that this Nathan Saunders somehow got the crazy idea, like so many converts before him, that Islam mandates violence against unbelievers?
It's very confusing.
It is.
I mean, we've been studying this for years, and we have no clue where he would get this idea. You know what, Robert? You know what I think it is? I think he converted to Islam. He went to his peaceful mosque, but then he was doing some research to expose Islamophobia, came across your site, and that's where he got all these jihad ideas, because no one else talks about this stuff except you.
Well, that's actually the case. Not that he read, well, maybe he did read Jihad Watch or watch Act 17 apologetics videos. I don't know. But it does say in the BBC report that he is believed to have radicalized himself online. Now, this is something that I see over and over again in jihad plots, whether they're from people who are born Muslim or people who convert. It's always they radicalized themselves online, or they were radicalized online. And that only just kicks the problem down the road, because it then leads to the next question, which is, why is it that these guys learn to the true peaceful Islam in their mosques, but then they go online and boom, all of a sudden, all the true teachings of Islam completely give way to this false, hijacked, twisted version that they can only find from jihadis and Islamophobes.
Yeah, and why don't we hear about this from every religion, right? Like so-and-so converted to Christianity, and, then he was going to nice Methodist church, but then he went online and he went out and started murdering people in the name of Jesus, right? I mean, you could have something like that, but you generally think that something was wrong with the person because it would be so rare, and yet we hear about it all the time. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to know how this online radicalization works, it goes like this. Let me find an online Quran. Fight those who do not believe in Allah. What's up with that? Fight those of the unbelievers who are near to you and let them find in you hardness. What's it? Let me go over to the Hadith here, because the Quran says I have to listen to Muhammad and I have to obey all his decisions. What did Muhammad say? I've been commanded to fight against people till they say that there's no God but Allah. I've been made victorious with terror. Hey, what's going on? Darn, I'm not living right.
And then, I have been radicalized online.
There you go.
Yep.
Happened in 5 minutes.
All you need to do is go to Quran.com and Sunnah.com and you're done.
Yep, it's all right there.
That's right.
But rejoice, ladies and gentlemen, because here's the thing. The same factors that are leading to online radicalization are also the same features that give us the tools to expose it. Right?
There you go.
Namely, for 14 centuries, people who wanted to criticize Islam did not have this open, easy access to the sources to expose them. So there's a cost, namely anyone from anywhere on the planet can become radicalized online by going to their sources, but also anyone anywhere on the planet can open up those sources and start exposing Muhammad as the most obvious false prophet in history. So that's the bright side.
Muslims themselves can learn what's in the text. When most of the Muslims in the world don't speak Arabic. The fact is that most of them were mouthing syllables that they only dimly understood at best. Many Muslims, not all obviously, but now any Muslim speaking any language in the world can go online and find a translation and find exactly what it means right away. I remember, in all seriousness, I had a guy tell me this many years ago. He said, I have memorized almost all of the Quran, and I am very proud of my religion, and one day I plan to get one of those translations and find out what it means. Now, that was not a joke. He was entirely serious, and he was a serious, devout Muslim. He said this to me personally, and he was acknowledging, in other words, that many Muslims, they recite their Quran passages during the prayers every day. They don't necessarily have any idea what they are affirming.
Yeah, I knew a couple of Greek kids when I was a teenager, Greek kids who didn't speak any English, and yet they could sing the lyrics to every song that would come on the radio. All the English songs that would come on the radio, they could sing the lyrics, but they didn't know what they were saying. And so
that reminds me of when I was a kid and I would go to the Greek church, and I didn't have any idea what anybody was saying. And luckily, they had anticipated this problem and had spelled out phonetically in Roman characters the Greek words that were being said, so I could stand there and say Kyrie eleison. But of course, by then they'd gone on to something else.
Very helpful.
Anyway,
very helpful.
Yes, it was much later I found out what it meant, and it wasn't really bad in that case. But we'll do the Christian Jihad another time, David. I'm sure there's a Christian Jihad watch, Christian Crusade watch somewhere, and we can get all these stories, equivalent stories, that show the people doing violence in the name of Christianity all around the world. We're always told this kind of thing is happening, so surely there must be such a site. Anyway, David, I've got a very interesting story out of Britain, everybody's favorite vacation land, and that was the Ahmadi Imam. Interesting that he would be part of the Ahmadiyya sect, which is not considered to be an Orthodox Islamic group by Sunnis or Shiites, but is very beloved in the West for being peaceful and not preaching violent jihad. But it's interesting to note that Mirza Masroor Ahmad, who is an imam in the Ahmadi sect, he was approached by a woman who had been raped. And, of course, he did not tell her, go to the police. He did not say that. As a matter of fact, he told her just the opposite. He said, my advice to you is that you drop this case, even if something happened. Even if it has, I'm sure that those involved would have asked for forgiveness already. And then he told her that in order to prove that she had been raped, she would need 4 witnesses.
Now, where on earth would he get that idea?
What a strange idea. Because after all, we know how many rapists are actually going to rape someone in the presence of witnesses. But this is a requirement in Islamic law based on chapter 24 verse 4 and 24 verse 13 of the Quran, which requires 4 witnesses to prove any sexual indiscretion. This is based, of course, on a very famous hadith, a story about Aisha, Muhammad's famed child bride. And this is one of the most interesting stories of Aisha in the whole literature about Aisha, which is all very interesting. But it seems that there was a caravan, and Aisha was part of it. She was by this time probably about 10 or 11. And she was put in, because the Prophet's wives had to veil, she was completely covered and put into a howdah, the thing that you put on the back of a camel. And she was riding along in this. Nobody could look at her. Nobody could see her. So they stopped, took a little rest stop, and to answer the call of nature, she got out of the howdah and went over the nearby hill. And then, when she was going back, she noticed that she had lost her bracelet. She searched and searched in the trackless desert waste for the bracelet, didn't find it. The caravan, meanwhile, they put the howdah back on the camel. They couldn't check to see if she was there in it because they couldn't look at her.
And Robert, they couldn't tell. They couldn't tell a weight difference because she was so tiny. Because she's a child bride, is that right?
That's right, David.
She was so tiny they couldn't tell the difference of whether they were carrying her or not, whether they were lifting her up or not.
Exactly. So the caravan left. She came over the hill. She's horrified. She's stuck. No cell phone. No way to get, no phone booth even. No way to get word to anyone. But as it happened in the scheming of Allah, a Muslim warrior was late for the caravan, was racing to catch up, and he saw the mother of the believers, this little girl, out in the desert. And so he put her on the back of his camel. They rode and caught up with the caravan. Muhammad was furious because, of course, if any male and female are together alone, then they must have had sexual relations. This is taken for granted even to this day. This is why there are all these rules against it. So she was put on trial. She was going to be stoned to death. But then Muhammad got a revelation. In chapter 24, verse 4, chapter 24, verse 13 of the Quran, you have to have 4 witnesses to prove such an allegation. Aisha was spared. Incidentally, this is the root of the Sunni-Shiite split, according to Islamic tradition in any case, that at a certain point when it looked as if Aisha was guilty, and Muhammad was very upset because he liked her. Ali ibn Abi Talib, who is the founding figure of Shiite Islam, he said to Muhammad, what are you so upset about? You can get another woman. Aisha heard this, and she was furious, and she hated Ali ever after. And that was the roots of her refusal to accept his being chosen caliph when Uthman died in 656. And that's what led ultimately to the Sunni-Shiite split. It was all because Aisha got lost in the desert.
and also led to some of the Quran being eaten.
That's right.
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, you have in Sunan Ibn Majah, Sunan Ibn Majah, number 1944. You can read it. Aisha says she had the only copy of some passages of Surah 33 of the Quran, and a sheep sadly came in and ate them while everyone was attending to Muhammad's death. And the verses she mentions were the verse of stoning an adulteress, right? Because she had been on the receiving end of that. She was on the verge of being stoned as an adulteress, based on the accusation. And the other was that women have to breastfeed grown men in order to be around the grown men. And so those were the verses that mysteriously got eaten while everyone was focusing on
that. It would be those verses, David.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Isn't that remarkable?
Mm-hmm. And of course the Sunni Shiite split, and none of that. You had the Battle of the Camel, where Aisha marched an army. Out against Ali. Aisha, the mother of the faithful, marched an army out against Ali, the commander of the faithful. Estimates are that about 10,000 Muslims died in battle. There were Muslims on both sides of that war that had fought alongside Muhammad at Badr and so on. So this is my goodness. It's like it was as violent as it possibly could be in that first generation, without completely destroying itself. If it had been any more violent, like even 1% more violent, it would have imploded. It would have wiped itself out. And so, but I mean, and also keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the reason that Sunnis and Shias and so on can never get away from that violence is Muhammad said that the first generation of Muslims were the best. That was the best generation. His generation of Muslims was the best generation. Well, his generation of Muslims were slaughtering each other left and right over all kinds of disagreements. Abu Bakr said, if you don't even pay your zakat correctly, he's coming to kill you as an apostate. That was the first and best generation.
The first four caliphs, or the rightly guided caliphs. Mm-hmm. And so the rightly guided caliphs preside over, as you noted, scenes of unimaginable violence. First, Abu Bakr fights the wars of apostasy to force the rebellious Arab tribes back into Islam. And then there are constant conflicts throughout the reigns of Umar, Uthman, and Ali. How many? Two of them died violently, I believe. Ali was killed. Uthman was killed as well. Uh-huh. And so this is sacred literature, and it's exemplary for Muslim.
Let me take one quick comment, because this one's easy. Yep. So this is from Paul. He says, hello, Mr. Wood. I watched your video about Muhammad Ali, and in the video, you said false prophet Muhammad was a white man. Please, what color was Papa Abraham? So yes, Muhammad was the whitest prophet in history. He makes Queen Elizabeth look like Queen Latifah. But the question is, what color was Papa Abraham? And Paul, I'm happy I can answer you. Abraham was green. And if you can't see that clearly from the text, then there's just no point talking about it, because we don't really care. All right, back to you, Robert.
Okay. All right, so we have Democratic Republic of the Congo. Muslims storm a village and open fire, murdering 17 people. These are members of the Allied Democratic Forces, and they stormed Idohu village in Urumu, Ituri province, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the large nation in the center of Africa. They are hoping to topple the local governments in Congo, Uganda, some of the neighboring states, and create an Islamic state there where Sharia is enforced. And it's noteworthy that where Islamic law, where there are people who want to impose Islamic law, they do so by force and by terror. in line with the mandate to strike terror in the hearts of the enemies of Allah, chapter 8, verse 60. So there was another attack in a different village in Democratic Republic of the Congo where 3 people were shot dead in their homes by the jihadis. 2 hostages were taken. The hostages, of course, according to Islamic law, can be killed, enslaved, ransomed, or freed outright, depending on what the ruler decides is in the best interest of the Muslims.
And the villain in all of this is Robert Spencer for talking about it.
Exactly. That is always the case. As a matter of fact, I get that pretty much regularly on Twitter, that I put a story like that, and so the headlines there, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Muslims enter village, shoot 3 people to death in their homes, take 2 hostages, and then there's the story about the Allied Democratic Forces trying to impose Sharia, and somebody says, you are just trying to stir up trouble and stir up hatred against Muslims. And I think wouldn't it make much more sense to say that the Allied Democratic Forces are trying to stir up hatred against Muslims rather than the people who report about their activities? But that is the state of the public discourse nowadays.
Yep, and we might just have to go back to saying that misunderstanders of Islam keep trying to impose Sharia and keep slaughtering unbelievers in the name of Allah. It's the misunderstanders.
That's right. They just don't understand Islam. They all don't understand Islam in the same way, but it's a difficult, complex religion, David, and only a very small number of people understand it properly. Mm-hmm. Over in Kenya, while we are in Africa, Ash-Shabaab, the jihad group out of Somalia, they attacked a shop where Christians were meeting for prayer. They murdered the Christians, torched the shop, and beheaded an ex-Muslim that they found there. And all of that, of course, is quite in accord with Islamic teaching. They accused the apostate of refusing to become a Muslim again, and thus they said that he was an enemy propagating bad religion. Mm-hmm. Now, what's noteworthy about that is that many times Islamic apologists nowadays in the West will say there's the death penalty for apostasy was just for treason when the state was fully Islamic. And it's not really for individual apostates who don't cause any trouble. But this fellow was not causing any trouble. He was just participating in prayer with some other Christians and was beheaded and accused of being an enemy just for the fact of being an apostate. He had become an enemy of the Islamic group.
Yeah, and we're back to the age-old problem that if what Muhammad actually meant was kill apostates who go out and then join an army and then come back and attack you, if that's what he meant when he said, if anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him, he is once again the worst communicator in all of history with the possible exception of Allah. Ladies and gentlemen, I mean, just imagine that, we'll put it in reverse. Imagine some Western leader coming out and saying, we're going to kill anyone who converts to Islam. And you say, what are you talking about? How dare you say something like that? And what if he comes up and later his followers clarify and say, oh, what he really meant when he said that was, if you convert to Islam and you go and join Islamic State and then you go to, launch a suicide mission and then, then you would kill them. No one would accept that response. No one would say that you get to be that horribly unclear when talking about killing people. And yet it's exactly what we find in Islam. Muhammad says, if anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him. And Western apologists say, what he really meant there was, if you leave Islam and then what, and then you go and you join a military and then you come back and you're attacking Muslims, then they can kill you in self-defense. It's like, okay, if that's what he meant, then he was the absolute worst communicator ever.
David, I thought the Quran was clear.
Claims to be clear.
Claims to be clear. It is the clearest, the most unclear, clear book in the history of the world. We have another misunderstander of Islam over in Britain, a visiting imam, unnamed in the Birmingham Live story, speaking at the Central Jamia Mosque Gamkol Sharif in Small Heath, one of those charming English names. And at the mosque in Small Heath, this imam praised the killer Mumtaz Qadri. Mumtaz Qadri was a Pakistani who gunned down a Pakistani politician several years ago, Salman Taseer. Salman Taseer was an opponent of the Pakistani blasphemy laws. He thought that they were the occasion of terrible human rights abuses, as we were just discussing a few minutes ago. And he wanted them repealed. Because of that, Mumtaz Qadri murdered him, because he thought the blasphemy laws are the laws of Allah, that the blasphemer must be put to death, and that non-Muslims are forbidden to criticize the Quran or Allah or Muhammad under penalty of death. And so Mumtaz Qadri killed Salman Taseer. Mumtaz Qadri then became a national hero in Pakistan. There was at least one mosque named for him, and he was celebrated as being a warrior of Allah, a Ghazi, a brave warrior in the service of Islam. Now, this preacher said exactly all that kind of thing in this mosque in Britain. Now, what's noteworthy about that is that, of course, we are always told that every last mosque and every last imam and every last individual Muslim in the West, in Britain, in Europe, in the United States, is completely loyal to the secular governments wherever they may live, and completely rejects the whole idea of jihad violence and of Sharia in every respect in which it contradicts Western laws. And yet we constantly see evidence to the contrary. And so this man who was let in to Britain from Pakistan in order to preach around the country, he is praising this man who murdered a blasphemer. That does not bode well for the future in Britain, because there are no doubt Muslims who don't believe this preacher, but many who do, and who think that those who blaspheme against Islam deserve to be murdered, and that the murder would be righteous because it would be murder in the cause of Allah.
Let me answer a quick comment here. Meg119 says, I have a question to David Wood. I just found out your channel, and why do you hate Muslims? I believe about 99% of your content is about attacking Islam. Meg119, I don't hate Muslims, never have, never will. The most devout ISIS jihadi up until the day of his death, I am hoping for the best for him. And that would mean that he turns away from that nonsense, turns himself in for his crimes, and faces justice. If I hated Muslims, I wouldn't bother telling them that they're serving the most obvious false prophet in history. Right? I see 1.6 billion people following the most obvious false prophet in history. This is a guy whose initial impression of his revelations was that they were demonic. He thought he was demon-possessed. He had to be talked out of that by his wife. This is a guy who repeatedly tried to kill himself because these delusions made him depressed and miserable and suicidal. Tried repeatedly to kill himself. This is a guy who admittedly delivered revelations from the devil. And then he delivered these revelations promoting polytheism, then came back and blamed Satan. This is a guy who was claimed to be a victim of black magic that gave him delusional thoughts and false beliefs. This is a guy who had sex with a prepubescent 9-year-old girl. This is a guy who took the wife of his own adopted son after causing the divorce by lusting after her. This is one of the sickest, most depraved people ever. And yet, unless you got it from my videos, you probably never heard of anything I just said. Why? Because all your information about Muhammad is filtered for you. They pick information and make things up that are designed to make you continue believing in Muhammad, because they know that if you actually heard the truth about him, you would leave. people would leave Islam if they knew the truth about Muhammad. So I'm sitting there looking at this saying, wait, you have 1.6 billion people believing in this guy, mostly because of outright deception. I don't like people believing everything based on deception and manipulation. So what do? I tell them the truth. And what's your response? Oh, you must hate these people for speaking the truth to them. You hate the people who speak, when you speak the truth, you hate them. What's that mean? If I really loved them, then I would be lying to them. Do you see what this religion does? You love someone by lying to them. You hate them by telling the truth. It's like up is down. I feel like I'm living in opposite world. Up is down and down is up and left is right and left, and evil is good and good is evil. So no, Meg, I'm going to continue exposing Muhammad, and more people are going to continue realizing that they've been had.
That's exactly where we are, actually, David. It's upside down world. There's been a concerted effort for all these years to shift the focus away from jihad violence and Sharia oppression and make it all about so-called Islamophobes. There's been a concerted effort to claim just what Meg said. She probably heard this somewhere from her imam or who knows who, but somebody told her that people who tell the truth, people who say these things about Islam and Muhammad, even though they are demonstrably true, that they are just full of hate, and that's all they are doing it for. It's a very common tactic. It's very effective, and that's why it's common. It intimidates people into thinking that they cannot stand up against Sharia oppression or jihad violence, because that would be joining the ranks of the hateful and bigoted. And so it's propaganda, it's a lie, but it's a powerful one. It's such a powerful one. As a matter of fact, David, that's a perfect segue into our next jihad story from this week, which is that Facebook has censored a Catholic charities campaign to protect women exposed to violence in Muslim countries. And I'm sure that would come as no surprise to you, given your experiences with Facebook.
Nope. Facebook literally banned content where I was saying don't be a Nazi. I mean, I took a famous picture. We've talked about this before, but I took a famous picture of a man who was in a crowd, but the crowd was ordered to salute Hitler. He refused. He sat there with his arms crossed, and I had a circle around that guy, and I said, "Be this guy," and Facebook banned that.
Incredible.
You can't say be the sort of person who wouldn't salute Hitler if you were ordered to. Welcome to the internet. So yeah, no surprise there, Robert.
Yeah, this is Aid to the Church in Need, which is, as I noted, a Catholic charity, and they launched a digital campaign in November to raise awareness of the violence that women often experience in Muslim countries. And Facebook restricted the campaign by 90% in November. They blocked it from 90% of the people who might have seen it, explaining that the ads were offensive, misleading, sexually inappropriate, or violent. And one of the spokesmen for Aid to the Church in Need said, "We are horrified that our campaign, which aims to help suffering women, has been censored in such a draconian manner. By claiming to have banned our advertisement for violating its guidelines, but refusing to say which guidelines or how, Facebook have made themselves judge, jury, and executioner." And of course, that's what they have done for so many people who speak honestly about the jihad threat. This is just par for the course for Facebook.
And I mean, that's the reason. I mean, the reason this is so incredibly horrible, and we've already touched on this, is a lot of people in certain places in the world are not free to speak out on their own behalf against their oppressors. Their oppressors will crush them for speaking out. This means that the only people who can speak out are people from elsewhere to try and put pressure on the country to change. And what do you find when you try and do that? You get crushed over here. You get crushed over here for you have to be silenced over here for daring to speak out for people who can't speak out for themselves. Strange world.
Oh, no doubt about that. In any case, we have a story also out of, well, it's not really out of Alabama, but it's a girl from Alabama. This is a charming young lady named Hoda Muthana. And she was very active on social media while she was living at home in Alabama a few years back. she wrote things like this: terrorize the kuffar at home. Men and women all together, you have much to do while you live under our greatest enemy. That is the United States, of course, even though she was writing this in the United States herself. Enough of your sleeping. Go on drive-bys and spill all of their blood, or rent a big truck and drive all over them. Veterans, patriots, Memorial Day, parades, kill them. We have men and women who love death as ardently as you love your lives. I was watching an American documentary on a battle in Afghanistan, and the Americans are such cowards, crying and shaking on the battlefield and saying, our aim is to get everyone home where they belong, while our men's aim on the battlefield is to reunite with our Lord. Our honor is in jihad, either victory or shahada. These men cry for their lives, while we cry for our death. Now here is a young woman.
Now you said Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, she was talking about Afghanistan.
No. I'm saying you said she's from Afghanistan, right?
She's from Alabama.
Oh, Alabama.
The Crimson Tide.
The Afghanistan of the U.S.
And that's where she was saying that there have to be attacks by jihadis in the United States against American civilians. Now, Hoda Muthana, this very charming young lady, she traveled several years ago to the Islamic State, and she lived there until the whole thing collapsed. Then in 2019, she insisted that she was an American citizen, while the president at the time, Donald Trump, and Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, both said, no, she's not actually an American citizen. She was not born in the United States. She came to the United States, and then she rejected her American citizenship when she went to join ISIS. So she's not going to be allowed back. Anyway, I believe it was yesterday, the Supreme Court refused to hear her appeal. And so they refused to consider the possibility that she should be allowed back into the United States. Interestingly enough, her whereabouts are unknown. I do hope you don't run into her tonight. But in any case, she is not going to be allowed back in the United States. Now, it's noteworthy that when she was trying, especially in 2019, to be allowed to enter the country, she took a very different tack from saying, terrorize the kuffar at home, spill all of their blood and all that. Instead, she said that it's so hard to get up in the morning. I'm risking my life doing these types of interviews. And I just want to go home. I want to buy a car and all these things. I'm so tired. I'm scared of my son being here. We can't afford bottled water. We have to drink tank water, and it causes stomach aches, and so on and so on. So, in other words, she was striking the victimhood pose that is so common among jihadis when they do not have the upper hand. And because, however, of her earlier statements and no real indication that she's changed her point of view, she was not allowed back into the country.
Yeah, and Robert, as usual, we are sympathetic because she has a 4-year-old ISIS child, and I'll offer the same deal that I've offered in the past. Hoda, you can come back to the U.S. and face your punishment. You'll go to prison, and Robert and I get to decide how your child is educated. That's the deal. That's the trade. And if you're not willing to have us oversee his education, how sincere are you about, renouncing your jihadi ways? That's all I'm saying.
Very good point.
Take it or leave it. Stay in the camp, or we take care of the education of your 4-year-old son from now on while you serve your prison sentence. And feel free to argue with him when you get out.
That would be fun. That would be great. I would be happy to aid in the education of the young man.
Yeah, we should start our own school for the children of returning ISIS brides.
That's a great idea.
The David Wood and Robert Spencer School for the Children of Returning ISIS Brides.
Beautiful.
That's golden right there.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of schools, I got another story out of Britain. A primary school teacher named Miriam Sabah, 52 years old, was found to have made 5 payments worth £2,500. That's what, about $3,200, to a jihad terrorist linked to Anjem Chowdhury's banned Al Muhajirun group. And this is a primary school teacher, David, financing jihad terrorism. You got to wonder what she's teaching the little kids. Of course, she's not going to be teaching them any longer, but it's extraordinary to note that most people think, if they think of jihadis, they think of wild-eyed fanatics in caves or something of this kind, not primary school teachers.
Not school teachers?
No, I don't think so.
Huh. Well,
But
keep in mind, everyone, that is one of the legitimate forms of jihad. Muhammad said that the one who funds a jihadi gets the same reward as the actual jihadi. So if you're actually funding terrorists, you get the same reward as the terrorist.
That's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I don't think I'm going to offer Miriam Sabah a job, however, in our school for ISIS children.
I have a quick story.
Yes, sir.
This was brought up earlier by someone in the chat, but it's about the Turkish student, the student in Turkey, who was actually an atheist. He was an apostate, and his family and school made him continue observing all the Islamic rituals and so on very strictly. And he posted a video explaining why he was killing himself and killed himself. And now the Turkish, you can't find this story in most places because a Turkish court slapped a ban on all coverage. And so I'll read a little passage on one of the sites that actually got the story out before the ban here. A Turkish court has slapped a ban on all coverage of a young medical student who took his life because he could no longer cope with the pressures of his religious family and the powerful Islamic Nur fraternity they had forced him to join. So they forced him to join a strict Muslim fraternity. The ban followed a formal petition lodged by Enes Kara's father, so the kid's father, Mehmet Kara, on the grounds that his family's grief was being compounded by the media that infringed on its privacy. Kara was laid to rest last week in his native Hatay province bordering Syria. However, the debate swirling around his tragic end continues apace, exposing the deep fractures between pious and secular Turks amid angry calls from the latter to shutter schools and dormitories run by the religious orders known as the Tarikats and brotherhoods known as the Simat. So anyway, Kara made national headlines after sharing a video he had recorded on December 5th, 2021, before his death on January 10th, in which he explained why he was resorting to suicide. In a low, faltering, and listless voice, Kara described his helplessness in the face of his daily grind at medical school, followed by evenings at lodgings run by the Noor Tarikat. And so it goes on to a list of all the things that he wanted to do. He just wanted to become a doctor and leave the country, but he just couldn't. He couldn't go on. So this guy was an atheist, and he just gave up. He would literally rather die than do everything they were making him do. And Robert, I mean, this is Turkey.
Yeah.
Wasn't that the apple of the Islamic world's eye? I mean, wasn't this like, this was supposed to be, I mean, this was supposed to be like a European country, right? Like this is I mean, this is supposed to be a European country.
Well, there are quite a few secular Turks still, David, but they're definitely on the defensive. The Erdogan government is reinstituting aspects of Sharia and rolling back Kemalist secularism wherever it can, whenever it can. There have always been quite a few people who believed that the secular government was illegitimate. Especially outside of Istanbul and Ankara, you have tremendous support for Sharia. And so it's a wonder, really, that this young man wasn't threatened with death to return to Islam, but probably his parents thought that if they forced him back into these things, then he would give up. But it's just plain coercion and harassment, ostensibly in contradiction to chapter 2, verse 256 of the Quran, which says there is no compulsion in religion, one of the famous, most favored verses of Islamic apologists. But actually, there's tremendous compulsion in Islam. The threats of hellfire, the ostracism, and social pressure given that we see in this boy's case, it all comes from the idea that the unbelievers are all in bad faith and the believers are superior morally, superior in every other way. And so to coerce someone is essentially to be good to them and merciful so that they can return to the truth
And
the straight path.
notice that's the enlightened version, right? So it's actually good that they're not running around chopping people's heads off, but instead it's we'll just harass you endlessly until you can't take it anymore and you commit suicide or you come back to Islam. But the idea is the same, that we're not just going to let you not live as a Muslim. We're not going to give you that option. We're going to make your life so miserable that and notice, Robert, these guys do the same things to ex-Muslim, especially ex-Muslim women here in the West. You see it. It's they endlessly stalk and harass them in an effort to make their lives so miserable that you either come back to Islam or you become absolutely miserable and depressed and don't ever dare
It's parallel to
criticize Islam.
Dhimma. The whole idea of the Dhimma is that the non-Muslims are so miserable that they've been punished by Allah in this world as well as in the next. And all they have to do to get rid of their misery is convert to Islam. Many of them did it over the centuries. It's the same motion, really. You just make everybody's life miserable until they do what you want. In both cases. I have a story here out of Indonesia, East Java. There were Hindus.
Indonesia loves me.
Yeah, that's right. So they'll be happy that you're covering this. This was a story out of Mount Semeru in Lumajang, an active volcano. And so some Hindus in the area left what are known as sesajen, which are offerings, to help appease the spirits of the area, at least in their view. And there was a Muslim who came along and was captured on video kicking and destroying the offerings, tossing them downhill and so on. And what he said to the camera was very interesting. He said, "These incurred Allah's wrath. It's seldom realized that these traditions incur Allah's wrath, so Allah doomed this place." So in other words, he's thinking that if there were natural disasters there in the past, it was because of non-Muslim worship, non-Muslim religious observances. And so he's going to ward off the evil now in order to make sure that there aren't more natural disasters in the future. Now, what's noteworthy about that is that that kind of attitude also leads directly to jihad violence, to jihad activity. Because, of course, there's the famous hadith in which a man asks Muhammad, "Instruct me as to such a deed as equals jihad in reward." And Muhammad says, "I do not find such a deed." In other words, there's nothing better than jihad. So if you are wanting to appease Allah, wanting to make sure that Allah's wrath does not come down upon you, then the best thing you can do is wage jihad. And that might turn away his wrath. So this guy is saying you can't have these Hindu offerings up here on this active volcano. Allah will get mad. And this is the same kind of thing that leads people to blow themselves up.
Yeah, we've talked about this as well in the past, that when we would hear stories of jihadis and they would say, but this wasn't a serious this wasn't a serious person because this person had drank alcohol in the past and gone to clubs in the past. So this person wasn't sincere, and they don't realize that's part of it. You got this young Muslim who goes to clubs and so on, and then starts to take his religion a little more seriously, and then finds out, oops, I've done a bunch of bad things in my life, and I'm in trouble with Allah, and I don't know what's going to happen to me, and yet I have this guarantee that if I wage jihad, then I'm good to go. And then they go out and, in an effort to save their souls, slaughter unbelievers in the name of Allah. And then we're told, has nothing to do with Islam because this person went to a club 5 years ago.
Yeah, it has everything to do with Islam because they're trying to atone for the sins that they piled up in the club 5 years ago. Chapter 21, verse 47 of the Quran says, if your bad deeds outweigh your good deeds, you go to hell. Your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, you go to paradise. Many other passages affirm the same thing. So you've got to get the best deed of all, the goodest deed of all, and that will get you into paradise. Outweigh all your bad deeds. Also, Allah is using you as the executor of his wrath, as we have also noted in the past. This wonderful passage in chapter 9 of the Quran, 14 and 15, fight them and Allah will punish them by your hands. So where St. Paul says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, I will repay, the Quran says just the opposite. Allah will punish the miscreants, the unbelievers, the sinners, etc., by the hands of the Muslims. So that means they have to be violent. They have to carry out Allah's wrath. And he will lay them low and give you victory over them, and he will heal the hearts of the people who are believers, and he will remove the anger of their hearts. And this is where jihad therapy is born.
Jihad therapy. Jihad therapy. You got to write a book called Jihad Therapy.
It would just be chapter 9, 14, and 15. That would be it. There was one jihadi back in 06, Muhammad Reza Tahiri Azhar in North Carolina, who quoted this passage in explaining why he was doing it. And he actually fit this same paradigm we're talking about, because he was getting drunk, he was doing all these things college students generally tend to do, and he felt bad. When he returned to Islam, he realized he had to atone for his sins, and he did so by trying to drive over a number of students on campus.
Well, Robert, we've been going about an hour, and the strange thing is, this is compared to a lot of the heavy jihad weeks in, past years when you had ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram and all these groups, this is a comparatively pretty slow week in jihad, and yet it seems like it's always still there. Even if we hear nothing about it in the media, it's all still going on behind the scenes in countries around the world.
You're right, David. It was a comparatively quiet week, but I still have 19 more tabs open with other news stories we could discuss. So quiet is quite relative in this context.
Seems like we could do a 5-hour show. We could probably do a nightly show.
Yes.
Called Today in Jihad, and and just cover the day's news because it is that relentless.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Robert, for joining us and keeping everyone updated on jihad. I keep saying that there'll be no need to be back next week, but it seems like even when it slows down, it's still relentless, and so I believe we could probably, sadly, make these shows indefinitely, forever.
That is likely true, David.
Can you even imagine a scenario where we reach a week and there's nothing to report? Can you? I mean, after doing this for a couple decades now, can you even imagine a scenario where there's just nothing to report?
No, not possible. I tell you, every day for 20 years, I've been doing this, and there has never been a day ever where I thought, my goodness, there's nothing to report. I can't find anything to post at Jihad Watch. There's always more than I can get to.
The jihad is like the mail. It just keeps coming and coming and coming and coming and coming.
Yep. That's true.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you aren't familiar with Robert's website, that is one of the websites that you need to check daily to stay updated on jihad. If you don't have his book, The History of Jihad, the link is in the description box. And for those of you who don't check up daily, at least be sure to check up weekly, and we'll have the latest news in future episodes of This Week in Jihad. Catch you later.
Thank you, David.